the Albatross Part I. I dozed as my head lay back on the seat, swaying in time with the rhythmic thumps of the train car. Each evening I commuted home from my classes in downtown Atlanta. Our mass transit system might not be the cleanest or the most efficient, but it got me where I needed to go. My route, the East Line out of town to the Kensington station, usually went without incident. Only once have I overslept and woken up at the end of the Blue Line, and I promised to never let that happen again. I actually enjoyed the downtime after classes on my way back to the suburbs. It gave me a chance to reset and be thoughtless while the panorama of skyscrapers, tunnels, and graffiti sped past. I usually managed to get the same seat, in the same car, with no other passengers to bother me. It is unlike the morning commute, bustling up against all of the worker bees pushing and fighting their way into the city. Only at night, when I am alone, am I free of that mold. Tonight started no different than any other. My laptop bag in my lap, the strap wound around my arm 3 times, because I am alone, and this is in fact still Atlanta. I woke slightly and peeked around as the train decelerated. I could tell by the buildings outside that this was only the second stop. Sitting upright, I stretched, hearing a crack from my neck. As I leaned my head against the window, I took notice of a man dressed in ratty trench coat enter the car. He's either selling drugs or bootleg movies, I thought. Occasionally, I would have to fend off offers of narcotics and pirated DVDs. I bought one once and quickly realized why it only cost me $5 for the movie. I quickly assumed my not interested pose of looking off into the distance and refusing to make eye contact. I swore under my breath as the man approached. He paused as the train lurched forward, then walked as he regained his balance. He continued to shamble forward, gripping the handle and the seat backs one after the other, almost like he was trying to climb a ladder. I again averted my eyes and fidgeted as I forced myself to keep from looking at the stranger. I watched his reflection in the window pane, his face detailed in the reflection. Wrinkles that long since have become canyons wound around his face and into his deep-set eyes. He paused at my seat, and I steeled myself to refuse any offer he might come up with. As I twisted in my seat to face him, he sat down and procured a beaten and worn leather book from deep within his coat. He knows I'm a student, and he wants to sell me a book in hopes that it's worth something, I thought. Sorry, I put my hands out and gently pushed at the book. I'm not interested. He cackled and smiled, showing at least 3 teeth missing. Sorry? He squinted at me with his left eye closed. Sorry, he said again quieter. My boy, I'm in need of your help. My time grows near, and I must be going soon. I've been following you for quite some time, and I think you are ready. Ready for what? I wished I had sat closer to the emergency call button and contemplated leaping over the seat and making a run for the end of the car. For the book, of course. He handed me the book, and I cannot make out the faded inscription on the cover or the spine. He grasped my hands and held them onto the book, more forcefully than I expected from him. The calluses on his hands grated on my skin. I have recorded from this tome for quite some time, but I'm getting too frail to keep it at bay. You, dear boy, are capable of becoming a chronic. What? I laughed a little, yanking my hands away and pushing further away. A chronic. It means a recorder. But there's little time, and we must begin soon. He pushed the book harder into my lap. I laughed again, feeling a dryness take hold in my throat. He seemed different from the usual crazies on the train, and he also seemed more determined. Oh, okay. What do you need me to do? I hoped to placate him. Don't patronize me, he shouted as his right hand struck my face. I could taste copper in my mouth and wondered if I was bleeding. I started to stand up and put my hands on his shoulders to push past him, but before I could do so, he placed a hand on the center of my chest, and I felt paralyzed. Unable to stand or look away, I started to feel sweat beat up on the back of my neck and the hairs stand. He looked at me again with one-eyed squint and said, Sorry, for the inconvenience, but you're being mighty stubborn, Not that I blame you entirely. I understand that I appear might on the loopy side of things, but I have need of you, and the fate of the world depends on it. He removed his hand from my chest, but I still could not move. He mumbled as he caressed the cover of the book, but none of his words registered to me. Finally, he spoke louder, but it seemed to be no one in particular. "Yes, he's the one. He will do just fine." His eyes darted back and forth, as if there was another in the car with us. "He just needs to be shown." His conversation, apparently over with the unseen listener, he focused his attention once again on me. "Listen, my boy, there's a great and terrible world beyond our own, a world of dreams and nightmares come to life. Long time ago, this realm was corrupted by a darkness. None know the truth behind it, but this darkness poisoned a realm of dreams and awakened a deep, deep hunger that desires to devour our world. It threatens to break through, but there are those chosen to battle it, chosen to hold it back and keep this world in the light until it can be healed." He took a slight breath and coughed. I saw specks of blood on his hand that he quickly wiped onto his coat. "I am one of those chosen to protect the world of the waking, and I am at the end of my path. I must choose another to carry this burden for me, and I believe it to be you." He tapped me again on the chest, and I felt my body unhinge and coil, prepared to run. He held his hands up and leaned away from me and said, You may refuse. I'm willing to take that chance. But time is short, and I will only ask of you two things only." He tapped the book with a long, bony finger and continued in a whisper, "Hear my story, and open the book. Once that is done, all will be explained. Can you do that for me?" "Sure, just a story in a book, right?" I pressed myself back against the window, wondering if I could sneak my hand inside my bag and rummage for my cell. "Wonderful," he smiled. "Let's begin." He placed his hand on the cover of the book and began to pry it open. He grunted and strained, as if pulling a massive weight, until finally the book lay open before us. There's nothing on the page," I said. I laughed and swallowed hard, to push down a lump rising in my throat. Not yet, my boy. First, I've got to tell you a story." His eyes, only now did I notice the lack of color, never left mine, and I found myself locked into his gaze, unable to look away. "My name," he continued, "my name is unimportant, but what is important is my story." My eyes shifted down and watched his lips move. I began to anticipate the words before he spoke and found myself rocking in rhythm with the cadence of his voice. "I've been a recorder for many a year. Can't remember how long ago now, which was the first sign that I needed to find you. Keeping so many stories in your head will do that to you. Too many strands to keep track of. Our minds, they're not limitless, you know." He reached up a hand and absently wiped flecks of spittle and blood from the corner of his mouth. "I was a young man, just like you, when I started. A man just like myself approached me, scared me to death. Jumped out of an alleyway, he did." He raised his arms and shook his hands in front of my face before clasping them once again over the open book. "Our run-in, all those years ago, was not very dissimilar to this encounter, but it was necessary. Life hangs in the balance. The universe hangs in the balance. We are at a tipping point, my boy, and you are a cog in the machine that will keep our world in the light a little longer." He paused as a coughing fit overtook him, and he doubled over. This time, larger objects appeared along with a red liquid in the palm of his hand. "I am hundreds of years old," he continued, "and I am growing weary. I'm ready for you, my boy." "Ready for what?" I asked, followed by nervous laughter. "What do you want from me?" I managed to find my cell phone in my bag and flipped the cover open to make an emergency call. "Why'd you have to do that?" The old man shook his head and placed his hand over my chest again. I felt my muscles tighten and unable to move. My cell slipped out of my hand and fell to the bottom of my bag. "I really didn't want to do that to you again, but you left me no choice." He shook his head and continued, "But I don't really blame you. I mean, this is absolutely unhinged when you're hearing it for the first time." He tilted his head to the side and said quieter, "He'll be fine, I promise." He tapped the open book, leaving a fingerprint of blood behind. Dark, inky blotches formed and swayed on the page. My eyes, danced with the ink, and I felt my head swim. "What's happening?" I slurred. "It's the beginning. Well, your beginning. Your beginning and my end." The ink formed into legible print on the top line. He removed his hand from my chest, and I leaned forward, blinking my eyes slowly, mesmerized by the spirals of ink on the page. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, still focusing on the words forming on the page. "Not much. All that is required is that you read. Read and remember." So I did. I looked down at the page, and I read the words on the page. As my eyes raced over the words, I heard them in my head narrated by my own voice. Neil inhaled the arid blast rushing through the passenger window. Looking at the stranger, I took a deep breath. "What was that?" "Just read. All you need to do is read. Every story you read will be one more step into the light for us all." My gaze fell once more upon the book. More words had already formed, filling the page. I read the next sentence, the words echoing as my eyes passed them. He gazed out at the vivid blue stretching in every direction before meeting the bright desert sand on the horizon.